Welcome back, and onto a very disturbing story right now, and this happened last week. And the Tshwane University of Technology's management say that Katlego Monareng's family is still traumatized. Now, the third-year student was shot dead, allegedly by police, and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Stanley Mukhola, had to deliver the news to the family in Bushbuckridge in Mpumalanga last Friday. Classes at the institution have been suspended for the remainder of the week to mourn Katlego's death. And meanwhile, a memorial service for the student will be held tomorrow. And Katlego Monareng was allegedly shot by police during a protest at the Soshanguve campus over Student Representative Council, or SRC, vote rigging and election fraud. Now, the police have since denied the allegation, but the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, is investigating the incident nonetheless. And to discuss this matter further, we join now by Thabo Shingange, who is the national spokesperson for the South African Union of Students. Thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you very much for having me. And
joining us from our Sea Point studios is Hugo Van Der Merwe from the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. Hugo, thanks to you as well for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Sakina.
And just before we get into this discussion, here's just a package, just to give us a sense of the developments here.
TUT management are still searching for answers. The institution says it's not clear how Katlego Monareng was killed. Initial reports say the legal studies student was shot dead, allegedly by police, following unrest which erupted after SRC elections on Thursday. Management says that delivering the news to the family was not easy.
I met the family, the mother, the aunt, the father, and the immediate family members. And I broke this sad news and assured the family that the university would be assisting them throughout, because this was an unforeseen event that took place. So we have to assist them by all accounts.
A police watchdog, IPID, has confirmed that it's investigating the matter. Meanwhile, Deputy Minister of Police Bongani Mkongi visited TUT this week, describing the incident as shocking.
The killing of our student, who shot the student, with what rifle, why there was live ammunition. I think it was explained yesterday in our meeting. That is something that the police will do, and IPID will facilitate that.
A memorial service for Monareng will be held on Thursday at the TUT Soshanguve North Campus. Sipho Sterman, SABC News, Pretoria.
So against that backdrop, let's take this discussion further. Thabo, let me start with you. Now, the police, of course, are denying that they were responsible for shooting Katlego. What do you know as a student organization about this?
I mean, as a student union, first and foremost, some of our members were part and parcel of the delegation that went to TUT to analyze the ground in terms of the SRC elections. Now, of course, you'd understand that there was a protest regarding vote rigging, whatever the case might be, of which then police, in fact, private security was first called in and then police came after. Now, upon the chaos that erupted from there, the student then was shot dead apparently by IPID statement and R5 rifle. So we need to then interrogate and ask as to what is live ammunition doing on our campuses to begin with. In fact, what are police doing on our campuses to begin with in matters concerning the internal arrangement of student governance?
It's amazing how unclear the situation is in terms of the facts, but someone was shot and killed. We didn't even get clarity for the most part in the immediate aftermath as to where exactly Katlego was killed. Do you know that? I
mean, as a student union, we can't exactly pinpoint the exact location because the news came directly, maybe an hour or two later, that a student has been rushed to hospital given that they have been shot. But within that chaos, the shooting arises out of dispersing of students. Now, we then need to ask, how do you disperse students with live ammunition to begin with? I think that's what we need to be interrogating, the violence that students are subjected to in terms of the abrasive use of force across many campuses. And it's not the first time that this is happening. A death should not be the only signal that tells you what is happening in our universities. In fact, we can even stretch it as far back as Fees Must Fall, where you've seen violence from the side of the state in terms of the police perpetuated towards students.
And let me bring Hugo in here. Hugo, as Thabo says, you know, the use of live ammunition on a campus to disperse students. What do you make of that?
Well, we have a situation here where there was real confusion about how it escalated. There are allegations of an assault, of someone being held hostage. So it's perhaps in that context where the police escalated this way beyond what it required. So we don't know at this stage whether it was regular policing who came in without any preparation to deal with a protest, or whether it was the public order policing unit who came in and who overreacted. But essentially we know that there was live ammunition on the site, which seems inappropriate in the context of a public protest. And I think, so this raises the question of, was this a situation on itself that was badly managed? But at the same time, it comes, as Thabo says, in a context where we have had various protests where police have taken a very heavy-handed approach, where also prosecutions, other state actors have overreacted in terms of the types of sentences that they're pursuing against students. So I think we have a situation where there are inflamed emotions and where the police are not given, I think, sufficient leadership in the type of how they need to engage with protests, how they need to engage with through negotiations to de-escalate a situation. The default approach seems to take a heavy hand to overreact, and I think that's where how we need to interpret this incident, but also a whole pattern of police engagement with student protests.
But Hugo, surely that is concerning, given that, as you and Thabo both pointed out, we've seen, you know, incidents of police and clashes with students in hashtag Fees Must Fall. We've had the Marikana massacre. Surely by now the police should know how to deal with crowds, and especially protesting crowds.
I think there's a gradual learning happening, but we haven't seen a coherent, comprehensive response to Marikana. And I think that's concerning, that this is such a slow process of responding. There isn't a massive attempt to rebuild public confidence in policing that has been destroyed by incidents like Marikana and other very visible examples of police excesses. So on the one hand, we don't have the confidence that they have the proper training, that they're properly equipped, that the right people are responding, that we're not sending in the extreme response police who kind of go in with a militarized response to a situation that could be de-escalated and managed effectively by just a much more sensitive response. We also don't have any sense of police accountability. We know that over 500 students are being prosecuted for their actions during the protest, but we don't know of the incidents where police are being prosecuted for what we know has been excessive police violence in some cases. So we don't know that there is proper accountability for police. And even with the proper training, with the proper authority, unless there's accountability, unless there's proper investigation and prosecution of excesses, I think we're still at a situation where there isn't sufficient trust in police. So it's nice to see that IPID, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, is looking at this, is making public statements that they are accessing the guns. So there's a sense that they're showing that they're serious about this. and I hope that they can do a proper investigation. In the past, their investigations have often been resisted by police, and they haven't been able to get to the bottom of these cases. So we hope in this situation there's enough pressure on them and on the police for proper accountability to happen.
And Thabo, you were nodding as Hugo was speaking there, of course, talking to the police and accountability on their part. But as for the students, I mean, what does this behavior mean now? Does it mean that every time students are disgruntled, when they are aggrieved about something, that they will go on the rampage? I mean, as a student union, you know, what do you make of the behavior of students?
But I think when we speak about the behavior of students, particularly when it comes to protests, we need to give it a context. Protest is more often than not the first option. There have been various engagements around the matter, there have been various meetings perhaps, and therefore the lack of progress leads to a situation where protest becomes an inevitable option. And so when you see a manifestation of protest, and of course, I mean, the media loves sensationalizing things. So when there's a protest, the media is there at the peak of the engagements. And that is how student protests become to be characterized. But I think the protest in and of itself is more broadly a frustration, an expression of frustration within, an expression of frustration in terms of how the system is not assisting or aiding towards some kind of agreeable solution in that particular context. So if you look at it from that angle, I think it wouldn't be justified to just look at the behavior of students.
But it's a cheap shot to say that, you know, the media likes to sensationalize. It is not the media that, you know, vandalize a property on campus. It's not the media that led to the scuffles that broke out. That was not perpetrated by the media. This is the behavior of students. And whilst I agree with the right to protest, surely the students do not have the right to go on the rampage.
No. I think what we must state as a union categorically clear is that we do not condone any form of violence. But when we need to understand, particularly from Fees Must Fall, how the situation has just been an abnormal situation. Society has been abnormal around Fees Must Fall. And so out of that abnormal context, abnormal outcomes emerged. Not to say we are condoning violence, but violence happened in various forms: institutional violence, police violence. Students responding to this form of violence in and of itself is an engagement of various types of violence. So we do not condone the burning, like you're mentioning, of buildings, the burning of libraries. But what are you saying? Are
you saying violence begets violence, and it's because of the institutionalized violence that the students are becoming violent?
No. I'm saying there's no single strand to violence. So to just zoom into students and say that students are being violent is not giving violence its proper definition in terms of how it occupies the space in institutions of higher learning. I'm not saying that the student violence is a correct thing. No. What I'm saying is that we need to first look at what is violence in this particular context. There are various ways to define violence. There's institutional violence. There is gender-based violence. There's a lot of form of violence that takes place, and we cannot zoom into one and categorize all from that particular lens.
Let me bring Hugo once again into this, because Hugo, listening to what Thabo is saying, are our institutions of higher learning simply a microcosm of what is happening in society more broadly, in that we have now just basically transported that violence into these institutions?
Absolutely. I think we find a very similar pattern of protests escalating into violence, and police engaging in violence and escalating the situation. But I think underlying all of this is essentially a breakdown in our governance and our state-civil society relationships, where we don't have a proper systems of communication, where something only becomes a crisis that's recognized by political leaders when there is violence. So we don't have a process where political leaders will come and talk and recognize education as a system in crisis until something burns down. So we don't have political leaders saying, oh, people are marching in the streets, we need to go and engage. They kind of only recognize it when it escalates beyond a controllable level. So I think we don't have a proactive system of governance. And I think at the student level, at the university level, there's a certain sense of these institutions do not have the resources in terms of student fees, scholarships, etc., to deal with the demands. So the students need to escalate it beyond the institution to the governance, to political level. And the only way that they can effectively do that presently is through violence. And I think that's where the avenues of communication aren't in place, where politicians aren't engaging proactively with these students. So we're now, for example, facing a call for a TRC for education, not simply dealing with it within each university, but dealing with it at a more systematic level and finding political solutions to these problems.
And Thabo, you know, yesterday the university held a press briefing. What did you make of that?
I mean, the press briefing in and of itself, their commitment towards an investigation is much appreciated, but I think the union calls beyond just the mere investigation. We're calling for accountability. A student has lost their life and somebody needs to account in terms of the university management, whether it is the police or whoever needs to account in terms of that particular situation. And accountability cannot be just a commitment towards investigating the matter. There can be investigation and covering up. We want accountability, we want transparency, we want justice for Katlego.
And I must say it was quite disturbing that the day after, the university did not know who the student was. They didn't even know if the person who was killed was a student. They would not commit to anything with regard to providing answers or taking any sort of accountability for this matter, Hugo. And the reality is that a young life has been lost. You know, what should be the way forward, especially in terms of policies from government's perspective, to ensure that we do not find ourselves sitting here discussing such a tragedy again?
There's various levels of responses, and I think we need to start with the individual victim and their family. Katlego, we don't know what his role in the protest was, whether he was a bystander or actively involved. And there's a need for that family to know the truth. They have a right. They have a right for accountability, for truth, for reparations, and be that from the university or from the police. So that's the starting point. Beyond that, though, this needs to investigate the role of the university, other actors. But I think we're going to face this again and again. This is an inevitable situation where there is such uncertainty about the future of the universities, the fees situation, and the relationship between the institutional arrangements and the political oversight of these institutions. So we need a multi-level response, both directly in terms of accountability and criminal accountability for this incident, right through to institutional engagement.
Hugo Van Der Merwe and, of course, Thabo Shingange, thanks to both of you for joining us this morning. And we will keep our eyes and ears on this particular story, and we'll let you know about further developments as and when it occurs. For now, let's take a quick break before the news.